Caymankind, welcome here at Pedro St. James. I love that sign. Welcome.
Prayers are read by the Honorable Minister of Health.
Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech Thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of Thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the governor of our islands, the premier, the speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the leader of the opposition, ministers of the cabinet, ex officio members and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties for high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. This Honorable Legislative Assembly resumes its business.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honorable Speaker of messages and announcements.
None.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports. The Office of the Auditor General, Cayman Islands report, key management and board remuneration in statutory authorities and government companies during 2016-2017, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the elected member for Northside, Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee.
The member from Northside.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Office of the Auditor General on key management and board remuneration in statutory authorities and government companies.
So ordered. Is the member intended to speak there too?
Just to make a short comment, Mr. Speaker, in that this report is a public interest report, so the Public Accounts Committee has not done any hearings on it, or there are no recommendations or conclusions drawn. It is a factual report based on the audited accounts of the 2016-17 accounts of the country in terms of the remuneration of the key management people in statutory authorities and government-owned companies.
Ministry of Finance and Economic Development financial statements for the 18-month period ending the 31st of December 2017. The report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development 2016-17 financial statements, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee.
The member from the North Side.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the report of the Office of the Auditor General on the Administration of Finance, Economic Development 2016-17 financial statements.
So ordered. Is the member speaking?
No, Mr. Speaker, the report speaks for itself.
Office of the Auditor General, Cayman Islands report. Workforce Planning and Management in the Cayman Islands Government, April 2018. The report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the report of the Office of the Auditor General on the Workforce Planning and Management in the Cayman Islands Government, April 2018. To be laid on the table by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee.
The member from the North Side.
Mr. Speaker, I beg permission to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the report of the Office of the Auditor General on Workforce Planning Management in the Cayman Islands Government and the Auditor's report on the same subject.
So ordered. Is the member speaking thereto?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Office of the Auditor General, Cayman Islands report. Follow up on the past PAC recommendations. The report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the Office of the Auditor General, Cayman Islands report. Follow up on past PAC recommendations. To be laid on the table by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee.
The member from the North Side.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Public Accounts Committee on the report of the Auditor General on the follow-up of past recommendations of the Auditor Generals and the Public Accounts Committee.
So ordered. The member speaking?
Just briefly, Mr. Speaker, and to thank the Civil Service Management and Ministers and Portfolios for their good job they have done in implementing the recommendations. There are two ministries that are outstanding, and those are reported on in the report, and I draw the public's attention to the two ministries that have not completed the recommendation.
Public Service Pension Board, actuarial valuations for funding purposes as of the January 1st, 2017. Public Service Pensions Plan, Parliamentary Pensions Plan, Judicial Pension Plan. To be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of Government, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the 1 January 2017 actuarial valuation reports for the Judicial Pension Plan, the Parliamentary Pension Plan, and the Public Service Pension Plans.
So ordered. Is the minister speaking?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do have some comments to make. Mr. Speaker, it is helpful to start by explaining what the terms pension plan and pension fund mean. In the public sector context in the Cayman Islands, the term pension plan refers to the set of rules that governs the operation of public sector pensions, such as the eligibility to receive pensions, how pensions are calculated, and the amount of contributions to be made to pensions by public servants and their employers, the Cayman Islands Government, along with statutory authorities and government-owned companies. The term pension fund refers to an arrangement that is established to receive pension contributions from employees and employers, to make pension payments to pensioners, to own assets, and to acknowledge and record its liabilities. In the Cayman Islands, Mr. Speaker, there are 3 public sector pension plans and 3 public sector pension funds. Mr. Speaker, under Section 10 of the Judges' Emoluments and Allowances Order 25, 2005, Section 10 of the Parliamentary Pensions Law 2016 revision and Section 12 of the Public Service Pensions Law 2017 revision, triennial actuarial valuations of the public sector pension funds are required in order to determine the rate or rates of contributions required for the funds to meet their liabilities and whether the funds are capable of meeting their long-term liabilities at the current rate or rates of contribution. Mr. Speaker, the actuarial reports reflect a combined $197.2 million deficiency with respect to the three public sector pension funds. The next triennial actuarial valuations are to be carried out with an effective date of 1st January 2020. Mr. Speaker, it is important that I explain why the deficiency is not a cause for alarm. With respect to the reports that have been tabled, the actuarial deficiency results from a comparison between the value of assets at the 1st of January 2017 and the value assessed for the liabilities or obligations that arise from future benefits that are due to public servants. The value of those future benefits is discounted back to the 1st of January 2017. Mr. Speaker, at the 1st of January 2017, the three public sector pension funds had a combined total value of $568 million for assets and $765.2 million for liabilities. The difference between total assets and total liabilities equates to the $197.2 million actuarial deficiency, which I stated earlier. It is important to note that the government is permitted to address the actuarial deficiency over a 20-year period. The objective is to eliminate such a deficiency by the end of the 20-year period, which is many years hence into the future, Mr. Speaker. The elimination of the deficiency will be achieved by the government continuing to make payments to reduce the past service liability amount. In the appropriation law for 2018 and 2019 financial years, which is a summary of the detailed 2018 and 19 budgets, $10 million is included therein with respect to past service liability for 2018 and $11.1 million for 2019. The combined amount of $21.1 million that will be paid towards reducing the past service liability for 2018 and 19 is in addition to monthly pension contributions that are based on percentages of public servants' salaries and wages. The Public Services Pension Board is expected to continue earning robust returns on the investment of assets of the public sector pension funds. And three, by conducting the triennial actuarial valuations to recommend the pension contribution rates required for the assets of the public sector pension funds in order to keep up with the value of benefits accruing to public servants. Mr. Speaker, a very brief history of the public sector pension arrangements will also help to explain why a pension actuarial deficiency exists at the present time. Public sector pension arrangements were initiated in 1963, Mr. Speaker. From 1963 to the establishment of the Public Service Pension Fund on the 1st of January 1990 is approximately 27 years. Hence, when the Public Service Pensions Fund was established, it inherited approximately 27 years of pension liabilities, but it did not have any assets or any funds to meet those liabilities. Therefore, the deficiency has existed from the first day of the fund's existence in 1990. This fund was established with effect from the 1st of January 1990, but no benefits could be paid out of the fund during the 1990s since it was not capable of meeting the projected liabilities after taking into account the contributions and earnings of the fund. During the 1990s and prior years, pension payments were directly from central government's general revenues. Mr. Speaker, since the year 2000, pension payments have been made from the public sector pension funds and not from central government's general revenues. This in itself is evidence that though there is an actuarial deficiency, the actuarial deficiency does not pose any immediate financial danger to the continued payment of pensions by the public services pension funds. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the government discloses the value of the actuarial deficiency in its financial statements. In summary, Mr. Speaker, the existence of an actuarial deficiency is not a reason for immediate concern because the government does have some time to eliminate the deficiency and is taking actions to do so. In the meantime, payments of monthly pensions continue to be made from the public sector pension funds without any difficulties. Mr. Speaker, the 1st of January 2017 actuarial valuation reports contain recommendations for pension contribution rates, and the Cabinet has accepted those contribution rates, recommended rates. With respect to the recommendations for the Judicial Services Pension Plan, a total of 30% of pensionable pay has been recommended for the defined contribution element of the plan, and 0% or nothing is recommended as a contribution rate for the defined benefit part of the plan, as the plan is fully funded and in fact has a surplus at the 1st of January 2017, and therefore no further employer contributions are required to fund the benefits for this valuation cycles. With respect to the recommendations for the parliamentary pension plan, 57.2% of pensionable pay is recommended for the defined benefit part of the plan, and 12.4% of pensionable pay recommended for the defined contribution element of the plan. With respect to the recommendations for the public service pension plans, 16.7% of pensionable pay is recommended for the defined benefit part of the plan, and 12.4% for the pensionable pay is recommended for the defined contribution element of the plan. For individual statutory authorities and government-owned companies, their contribution rates are specified in the report under the section containing details for the public service pension plans of page 25 of that section. Mr. Speaker, in order to catch up with the increased pension contribution rates as recommended in the report, the government will be making an additional payment of CI 1.8 million to the Public Service Pension Board in each of the 2017, 2018, and 2019 financial years. This additional payment that totals 5.4 million is the extra amount required of the government to make good or make whole the contributions to the past service liability figure for the 3 fiscal years that will end on the 31st of December 2019. Mr. Speaker, it is important to explain that the pension actuarial valuation reports that have been tabled are funding valuations, meaning that these reports recommend the amount of cash contributions that government should make in order to fund the benefit payments. The pension funding valuation reports differ from pension accounting valuations reports, with the latter being used to determine the pension amounts that are reported in the government's financial statements in order to comply with international public sector accounting standards. Mr. Speaker, since the results from the funding valuations and the accounting valuations of pensions differ, chiefly because of the need to use a different discount rate in the valuations, honourable members and the public should not compare the pension deficiency estimates provided in the funding valuation reports tabled today with the pension liability estimates contained in the government's forecast financial statements for 2018 and 2019. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, the government will pass regulations to give legal effect to the pension contribution rates that I have previously outlined, and those regulations have now been drafted. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions to honorable ministers and members of the cabinet. The elected member for East End to ask the honorable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure. Question number 51.
The member for East End, question number 51.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, question number 51, standing in my name, asks of the Honorable Minister for Planning, can the Honorable Minister say what is the government's policy regarding appeals against decisions made by the Central Planning Authority?
The Honorable Minister of Commerce, Planning.
Mr. Speaker, through you, sir, I'd like to thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, let me first clarify that the appeals against decisions of the Central Planning Authority are not a matter of government policy, but rather statutory requirements as set out in Section 48 of the Development and Planning Law 2017 revision and the Development and Planning Appeals Rules 1999 revision. Mr. Speaker, the Central Planning Authority and the Planning Appeals Tribunals are both independent of government, and whilst Cabinet approves members on both entities, they do not get involved in the decision-making process.
The elected member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I didn't mean to have a rhetorical question put on the floor because I understand that appeals are established under law, Section 48. But I would like to ask the Minister, how come then, whilst appeals are governed by the ministry, how come Topaz Chicken Farm, not being an applicant or an entity as defined, or a person as defined by the interpretation law, were allowed to appeal a decision of the Central Planning Authority?
Honorable Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the appeals are not under the ministry. The appeals are with the Appeals Tribunal. And, Mr. Speaker, the Appeals Tribunal, we don't dictate to them who, or we don't get involved at that level to say who cannot file an appeal. I think the Development and Planning Law 2017 revision 48.1 states clearly who can and who cannot file an appeal with the tribunal.
The member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Minister then, since he says it's not under his ministry, the Secretariat for the PAT resides within that ministry, and the ministry has absolute responsibility for planning. Did the ministry then mount a defense on behalf of the CPA?
The Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, yes, the Secretariat is within the ministry, but the appeal lies with the Planning Appeals Tribunal, sir.
The member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister then tell us who has responsibility, who pays the Attorney General office or whomever to represent the CPA?
Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member said, should the CPA require legal opinion, they would go to the Attorney General, or they have that option, and that would be paid for by the CPA.
Member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister can tell us if there are any plans Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister can tell us if there are any plans to change the planning law to require CPA and the department to consider, ensure that the applicant for planning permission, development planning permission, is eligible to do so.
The Honorable Minister of Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, through you, sir, I'm not sure if the member is asking or offering as a suggestion, or whether if he's aware of any submissions for that. But as far as I'm aware, and I've been reliably informed, there are no plans to change the law in that regard. So again, Mr. Speaker, I think Section 48(1) in the law clearly states who can and who cannot file an appeal, sir.
The member from East End.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not talking about appeals here. I'm asking who can apply for planning permission. And it wasn't a suggestion, it was a question. Currently, the planning department nor CPA, Central Planning Authority, concerns themselves with whether or not the applicant is, should I say, have standing or is eligible to apply for development for planning permission. Well, the Premier is saying it's not so, but the CPA made that very clear to me that they don't concern themselves with who the applicant is. They only make their decision based on the application. I want to know if it is not time that we consider ensuring whomever applies has the authority and has the requisite companies or whatever the case may be, is a person in accordance with the interpretation law.
The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not answering a question, sir. I'm going to make an observation, because the member's line of questioning is based on a misunderstanding of the law. Really? Anyone who is making any application, not just with respect to a planning matter, but generally, must have the necessary locus standi, or standing before the law, interest in the matter, in the legal sense, to be able to pursue the application or the appeal. Whether or not there is sufficient locus standi is a matter to be considered by the tribunal who is dealing with the matter. So I think we're off on some wild goose chase here if we are trying to change the law to ensure that persons have the requisite, that the relevant tribunal determines whether or not the person has the relevant locus standi. That's something that they should do and are required to do as a matter of course.
Mr. Speaker,
the member
you
for
sound
East
like
End.
he misunderstands it too. I ain't talking about the appeal. I ain't talking about the public appeals tribunal determining whether they have standing to appeal. I am talking about applying for development now, because that then will determine whether they have standing or not. Because as it is, the trade and business license law simply says trade and business also includes development of any property. And you must have a trade and business license. It also goes on to say that if you only Caymanians are exempt for farming. And this chicken farm wasn't Caymanian. They didn't have any trade and business license. Therefore, they were not eligible to apply for planning permission.
Honorable members, honorable members, it's very, very interesting, in fact, because it is a live issue. But I believe we've gone outside the scope. And I'm going to ask members to treat me nice, because I can't talk too much today. The Minister of Commerce, are you going to try to answer?
Mr. Speaker, it is obvious that the member is aware of a case that he has concerns of, and I'm certainly happy to review that and to take into considerations that the member may have, and look into it, Mr. Speaker. That's the best I can do at this point. So.
Member for East End, the last supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's glad to know that the minister is prepared to now look into it, because I brought this to the attention of the minister some time ago and I haven't had any response. That's why I had to bring it to the floor of this legislative assembly.
Mr. Speaker, the member brought to my
Two
attention.
members on their feet. Member for the Honorable Minister.
And I know how that works. I stand up until he sit down.
Honorable Minister.
That's been in here long enough, you see. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, there's no need for us to be bringing these things in here unless we bring them in substantive motions to ask for changes. That's why we should get responses when we ask for these things. And we query them, because it can be settled outside of these chambers. And we come to amicable agreements on how we move forward. But it appears like that is not something that others consider.
The Honorable Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And then we have to move on.
Not to drag this on, but the member did reach out to me and discuss the matter of the appeal, that the person who submitted the appeal was not the person that submitted the application. That is what the member spoke to me about, and I followed up, and I did, in a discussion with the member, explain that was that was up to the chairman of the Planning Appeals Tribunal to make that decision. So I am happy to sit down and discuss with the concerns with the member, and we can certainly review. And again, if it is something that will provide for a better process and provide better protection for industry and for Caymanians, I'm happy to discuss it with the member.
Next question.
The elected member for Bordentown West to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing. Question number 52.
The elected member for Bordentown West. Question 52.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question number 52, standing in my name. Can the Honourable Minister provide an update on the security services at the Health Service Authority and when the Cayman Island employees in the security department may expect to return to work. Thank you.
The Honorable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the clerk has kindly brought to my attention the fact that we have
not reached the hour.
Yeah, that we passed 11 o'clock, and I move the usual motion for the suspension of Standing Order 23, 7, and 8 in order that questions may be asked after the hour of 11 o'clock.
Question is that standing orders be suspended in order for questions to be asked after the appointed hour. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The Honorable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During its regular operational review, the Health Services Authority discovered anomalies in overtime payments within the security department at the Cayman Islands Hospital. As a result, and in keeping with the authority's fraud prevention policy, an external investigation was conducted. This fair and independent investigation relied on the expertise and recommendations of the Internal Audit Department. The authority is now completing its own internal investigations, further to the findings of the independent investigation as established in its HR policies and procedures manual. It is expected that the process will be completed by the end of May 2019. In the interest of a fair process, no further comment will be made at this time.
The member for Bontown West.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask the Honorable Minister to advise this Honorable House what date the operational review was conducted?
The Honorable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, please bear with me a few minutes as I consult with the team. Mr. Speaker, I can advise the honorable member from Bordentown West that the COO started the investigation in February 2018, as I understand it.
The member for Bordentown West.
Mr. Speaker, I am going to move off this question because, unfortunately, for the minister, as a member of the Public Accounts Committee, I do have a little bit more information than he does. And as a result, I can tell you, I won't ask any more questions because I do not want the minister to be put in a position to mislead this honorable house. So I will end it and I will discuss this with the minister offline because the minister is being misled.
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I hear the member, but I gave him the information that had been provided, and never my intention to mislead.
Yeah. Next question.
The elected member for Bontown West to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing, question number 53.
Member for Bordentown West. Question number 53.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question number 53, standing in my name. Can the Honourable Minister outline the current governance structure in the Health Service Authority as it relates to clinical and non-clinical services?
The Honorable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The current governance structure of the HSA consists of 9 senior managers led by the Chief Executive Officer and guided by a board of directors who are appointed by the Cabinet. Of the 9 senior managers, 5 are related to clinical services and include the following persons: the medical director, the director of the Sister Islands, the director of primary health care, the chief nursing officer, the director of corporate services, clinical and non-clinical services. The remaining 4 senior managers are responsible for non-clinical services and include the following persons: the Chief Human Resources Officer, the Chief Financial Officer, the Chief Information Officer, the Chief Operations Officer.
The member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to the role of the board in governance of the HSA, can the minister advise this Honorable House with regards to any changes to employees' contracts by any of these the senior personnel that he mentioned in terms of structure? How would that go about in terms of who would approve those changes to the contracts?
The Honorable Minister, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I indulge your patience. Mr. Speaker, I'm reliably informed that the board is responsible for any changes with the CEO, and the CEO is given the authority by the board for all other employees. Any changes in salaries or otherwise are supposed to be approved by the board.
The Honorable Member for Bordentown West.
Mr. Speaker, considering the changes, or rather the implementation of public authorities law, isn't there also a requirement for any, material changes for the ministry or the minister to be notified or contacted?
The Honorable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the process is that they're supposed to seek approval from the minister before any other appointments are made or changes.
The member for Bordentown West.
Mr. Speaker, have there been any recent changes to personal emoluments at the HSA at a senior level that was done without the ministry's consent?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, because of the sensitive nature of this, if the member from Bordentown West has information, I would like to meet with him privately for him to share this information with me, which is very interesting. So, yes.
The member for Bordentown West.
Mr. Speaker, I have no problem in terms of meeting the Honourable Minister privately. Just one last, and to discuss this issue. But just out of curiosity, can the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House if it is a situation where a member of the senior staff did get a salary increase and it did not go through the proper authorization channels, what would the repercussions be, or what action can we expect the minister to take in that regard?
Well, as it's set, I guess it would be the board would take the action. But I'm very interested, and if the member from Bordentown West has some information, I would like him to share it with me.
Member for Bordentown West.
And Mr. Speaker, and if the board, since the board is appointed by cabinet, and if the board has a job to do, and the board doesn't do their job, what can this Honourable House expect the Honourable Minister to do?
The Minister of Health.
Well, first of all, you would need facts, and Cabinet gave the approval, so they have to bring it to the attention of Cabinet if anything untoward was happening and matters were not being attended by the board.
The member for Bordentown West.
Mr. Speaker, thanks very much. Given the previous answer that was given regarding security services and the operational review, can I therefore ask the Honourable Minister then, because I don't want to really reveal my sources, to do an operational review and have it done by either the Internal Audit Department or the Auditor General to go and have a review of any salary changes over the past 3 to 4 years of senior management within the HSA to determine if they were all properly approved?
Mr. Speaker, I would be happy to do that. It would be of great interest to me also. And the acting CEO and the chief officers is in listening ear, and I'm sure they took notes to provide that information to this Honourable House as soon as possible.
Last supplementary.
Yeah, can we just
the member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we have an idea in terms of what time frame can we expect some report back to this Honourable House or to the Honourable members?
Mr. Speaker, I'm reliably informed that the ministry will, the chief officer will undertake to check with the audit department to see their workload and try to have this out as quick as possible.
Next question.
Mr. Speaker,
Honorable Minister.
I would say that, I would dare say that with all the technology that we have, and the urgency of the matter today being the 10th of April, sorry, but
Minister,
but
we understand.
But I'd undertake that by the end of at least by the end of April, we should be able to have that information available.
The elected member for Bontown West to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing. Question number 54.
The member for Bontown West. Question 54.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question number 54 that is standing in my name. Can the Honourable Minister provide an update as to progress made with the mini hospital as identified in the Health Service Authority's strategic plan?
Honorable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member from Bontown West for asking about this mini hospital. This is something that has been talked about even from previous governments, emergency centers, in fact, me and the honorable member have discussed this even before the election and it's a question that came up during the election debate some years ago. But arising from a comprehensive 30-year master facility and service development plan developed for the Health Services Authority to determine the facilities and services required to meet the future demands of the Cayman's growing population for health care, a mini or a satellite hospital was proposed in Bordentown. Data from the Economic and Statistics Office show Bordentown is the fastest growing district in the Cayman Islands, with population growth fast outpacing the current capacity, infrastructure and services offered at the existing Bordentown Health Center. Mr. Speaker, the need for an emergency medical response post in Bordentown has also been identified by the HSA as critical to its ability to reduce emergency response times and to provide speedier interventions for patients needing emergency medical care. The HSA and the ministry are now engaged in dialogue with the Department of Lands and Survey in identifying appropriate Crown land in Bordentown for this proposed facility. Once the site has been identified and agreed, the authority will initiate the process of soliciting proposals for design drawings and costing for this project. Any commitment for construction of this new satellite hospital will be dependent on the cost proposals received and available funding. A firm timeline for this facility will be made during the second half of the year after the vendor proposals have been received with estimated costs for construction and proposed time frame. The proposed facility, based on recommendations outlined in the master plan, would ultimately replace the existing Bordentown Health Center with a footprint of approximately 58,845 square feet, comprising the following services: 24-hour accident emergency urgent care services, 8 to 12 inpatient beds, 1 operating theater, specialist services including OBGYN, orthopedics, pediatrics, dental services, dialysis service, physiotherapist services, EMS service station for Central to East Grand Cayman with 2 ambulances. It is anticipated that the project will deliver a range of benefits, including improve access to high-quality services in the community by providing local access to core medical, surgical, and specialist services, significant improvements in EMS response times to emergencies in the Eastern District, continuity of operations from disruption by disasters and other emergencies with second sight of critical services, increased ability to meet the government output target, reduce waiting times for services, improve recruitment and retention due to a radically better working environment, approximately 100 new local job opportunities during the construction phase. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Bordentown West.
Mr. Speaker, I just rise to thank the Minister for that update, and also just to ask if it is expected that any funds would be included in the upcoming budget to start this off. I think this is something that is well needed in the Eastern District. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I must admit,
Minister of Health.
Funds had been identified.
How much? Honorable Minister.
What I would prefer is that we don't run to guesstimations.
The member for Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick question. In light of the services now being provided at Health City, have the minister looked at not having to duplicate and to supplement or join hand in hand? Because when you go up there now and see the people that it goes to Health City, I would think that much of the services could be provided there. But the magnitude I see this, Mr. Speaker, it's anyway.
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure all would agree that this is much needed, especially in saving lives in the Eastern District. I agree that we should utilize whatever services here we have on the island in terms of Health City, but we must all agree that Health City was not built for the capacity and was actually built for tertiary services, albeit they're now forced because of the confidence in them to provide other primary care. But I would never be one that would want to duplicate anything that is being done or that can be done there. And you know, this is a proposed plan, and this has to go out for consultation with communities and to ensure that we're not duplicating anything. And I take the members' comments on board, and my contribution to the board or to management would be to ensure that we meet with other stakeholders, including Health City, to ensure that we're not doing anything duplicitous in trying to create an emergency center in the center of the country that would be well served for East End, North Side, and Bordentown and other connecting areas.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just to the minister, I noticed we're talking about having an operating theater there. Would that primarily be for emergency situations, or would that be for routine scheduled operations?
Honorable Minister, Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker,
Minister.
as has been said, this is a proposal, and these were some of the recommendations. But as it is, this would be something of the emergency nature.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to thank the Minister for his response. I understand it's early and this is a proposal, but I would like to go on the record to state that I'm in full support of doing something of this nature. I even campaigned on it, put it in my manifesto, so it has my support. But I'll echo what the member from Savannah said. If there are any savings that can be obtained through partnerships, I would encourage that. But definitely, I want to see the outpatient services improved and increase in the Bordentown district. Thank you.
I want to thank the member for his comments. And I must say that there are some estimates out there, and nothing near what the member on the other side is suggesting.
The member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the minister agree that although there are, I think LCD has made a good contribution to the local economy and to the local provision of health care, would the minister agree that in the final analysis and at the end of the day, the medical care of Caymanians rests with the government and us, the people, to take care of and not to rely on any private enterprises in terms of what it is that they want to do?
The Honorable Minister of Health.
I want to thank the member for that, and absolutely he is quite correct. Thank you.
Next item.
Statements by the honorable ministers and members of the cabinet.
Statements. I have received a statement from the Honorable Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, in November 2018, this Honorable House unanimously approved the private member's motion, which resolved that government consider the creation of a steering committee to look at implementing a performance incentive compensation scheme within the civil service. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that a committee is being formally established to oversee the development of this policy framework. Members have been identified who are talented and experienced and represent diverse businesses areas across the civil service. The initiative will be facilitated by the portfolio of the civil service as the agency responsible for HR strategy, and will include representation from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, the Civil Service Association, HR and finance professions, the private sector, and leaders at the ministry and department level, including district administration. Mr. Speaker, as you recall, during the debate on the private member's motion, honorable members on both sides of the aisle recognized the tremendous strides the civil service has recently made to improve performance and service delivery. They encouraged us to explore ways we might both recognize these strides through a rewards policy and encourage and accelerate future business improvements. The Performance Incentive Committee is charged with recommending appropriate incentives, both non-financial and financial, identifying the conditions required for successful implementation, and reporting on their findings and recommendations. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to reporting back to this Honorable House by the end of the year, and we thank you and other honorable members for your support of the civil service through this initiative. Thank you.
Personal explanations?
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches?
None.
Raising of matter of privileges?
None.
Government business? Bills? Second readings? The Builders Amendment Bill 2019, continuation of debate.
The Builders Amendment Bill 2019, the Honorable Minister of Commerce, winding up the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, first want to thank my colleagues and members of this House for their tacit support of this bill, and for those who contributed to the debate and suggested changes. It was refreshing to see that both sides in the aisles are somewhat in agreement, and it is my aim to address the points of concerns and to clarify and give peace of mind to members that this amendment will indeed go a long way in creating a stronger, more efficient building industry. Mr. Speaker, one of the concerns raised was surrounding why a contractor can't build a medical facility. Mr. Speaker, this is simply because in the Cayman Islands Building Code, the medical facilities are categorized within the institutional group for occupancy type. For example, healthcare facilities and the like that undertake surgery and overnight care. So we felt that this would be more for the companies that had the ability to get the specialized expertise in order to carry out or be responsible for such a facility. Under the code, Mr. Speaker, a doctor's office which conducts outpatient services is recognized as a business or a professional service. So this, Mr. Speaker, would not exempt the other categories to be able to do fit-outs or to do doctor's offices, dentist offices, etc. Or construction, but once it's not an institution under the code. Mr. Speaker, there was also some concern about the ability for the board to have the ability from time to time determine the category of work. So in other words, the ability to allow a company within one category to carry out works within another. In certain cases, a business may be so specialized that it conducts work that relates to a specific field in a related category, Mr. Speaker. In these cases, the board may limit the company to those types of operations. For example, there may be an alternative energy contractor that specializes in geothermal or even solar thermal that will need to be registered with the board. And the board has the breadth to facilitate such a registration and to regulate that entity for that project. It is also prudent to design in flexibility for future changes that may not be anticipated at this time, so the board can make those. Mr. Speaker, I think one of the greatest concerns was in relation to a business's growth and how a business may move between categories. Mr. Speaker, there are two methods to accomplishing this. If you are a small contractor without the expertise in the higher category, but you have demonstrated previously in your current category that you have conducted business in a fashion in a fashion that shows that you have the competency in that particular category, you can employ the necessary staff with the necessary qualifications and experience and capacity to allow your company to move up. Or, Mr. Speaker, another way that this can be done is that they can team up with or act as a subcontractor from a larger company to gain the necessary experience as noted in Clause 5.5d. And, Mr. Speaker, this clause also protects the smaller contractors by having the main or general contractor become responsible or bear responsibility for the overall work undertaken by the smaller contractor. Mr. Speaker, one of the key changes to this legislation was the definition change from qualifying individual to qualifying person. I wanted to expound on that a little. The qualified individual refers to a sole individual, the person who registers a company. So that sole individual was what was considered the qualifier previously. That person could hold the company, and only that person could represent the company and hold the company ransom. A qualified person, Mr. Speaker, in this amendment, has a more liberal meaning and can be taken in a plural sense, i.e., as a person or a group of persons that has the necessary skills within a company. So again, it's a company demonstrating that it has the staff, the ability, whether it's to manage the finances, the insurance, and the technical ability to operate. So it's a much more liberal version, and that is, it's a legal opportunity. Well, no, you don't have to identify just one person. It's not one qualifying person. It's a company that shows it has the ability. So yesterday I spoke and gave an example of a large development construction company that the managing director, who has managed the company for 10 years or more and have built large complexes, the previous board said that that person didn't have enough construction experience to be the qualifier. So, but he can manage and has managed experienced persons. So this makes it much easier for the board to take into consideration all aspects of the company's ability to carry out a project. Mr. Speaker, another question was surrounding why are labor brokers defined. Mr. Speaker, this is something that we certainly will look into further. But labor brokering is a form of outsourcing that provides a company with casual labor, and in this case, construction labor. In Part B of the Trade and Business Law 2018 revision, under the contractor category, labor brokers are allowed to hold a contractor's license, but this is only to provide such casual labor to contractors. However, by identifying and specifying what their roles are in the industry in this law, the labor broker does not provide the structure or competency to undertake construction. So because they are identified in a trade and business license law under a contractor's license, we had to put them in this law to ensure that they do not participate in construction. We certainly will have a look. We understand, that there is already provisions for recruitment companies. I am suspicious that this possibly was put in there for immigration purposes at one point or something, but we will certainly have another look. I give my undertaking we'll have a look at that in a holistic manner. Mr. Speaker, the question was asked regarding the board reappointment. Mr. Speaker, this is just simply a necessary step now that the categorizations have mostly fallen away and a new board needs to be appointed under the new categorizations that are specified in this amendment, this bill, as the old categories will fall away once this bill has been passed. This also allows, Mr. Speaker, for a little bit of continuity on the board as we move forward. Mr. Speaker, the question was asked about ethics for the board. Mr. Speaker, in Part 7 of the existing law, the schedule to the Builders Board addresses the constitution of the board, and it also lays out the conduct of the board specifically. Section 2.5 notes that Cabinet shall terminate the appointment of a member if they commit a number of offenses or is unfit to discharge his or her functions. And Mr. Speaker, Section 3.1 requires a member to make a declaration of interest in any matter before the board. We will certainly also take into consideration to have the board members, Mr. Speaker, sign the Code of Ethics as well. Mr. Speaker, another important aspect of this was owner contracting. This is the ability for a Caymanian to build his own home or her own home. And the question was that members had concerns with regards to why this wasn't a category but rather an exemption. Mr. Speaker, if this was a category of contractor, then the owner would have to demonstrate that they have the competency to undertake the project, and many may not qualify. So if this were to be a category as a contractor, then they would have to fulfill the requirements of everyone else in that category. So this is why we have decided to do it as an exemption from having to have that, to be registered under one of the categories, but have the ability to interact with BCU and to manage and build your own home. Mr. Speaker, we felt that one home every 7 years, barring any special circumstances, was satisfactory. The building and selling of houses in succession, Mr. Speaker, is a business. And this amendment is a mechanism to put Caymanians into their own homes, but with the oversight of the planning department. However, if an entrepreneurial Caymanian is interested in developing houses for sale, then they need only become registered as a contractor. Mr. Speaker, there was also a question surrounding Section 5B, I think, working in other categories or having the ability to contract jobs outside of categories, or having the ability to do jobs that are similar in nature. This was also the ability for, in particular, small works contractors, or that would do, for instance, flooring or sheetrocking. This would give them the ability to be able to work under as a subcontractor, or in part with a contractor, get a contract to do works in the other categories. Mr. Speaker, it was also important that we allowed some businesses, as I referred to yesterday, that may want to have recognition or be registered, although they may not have interactions with the BCU on a regular basis, but it may come up, and or they, for the reasons of being able to say that they are registered and that they follow the code of conduct, etc., in their marketing of their business, we have allowed for the board to be able to register those individuals as well, rather than creating dozens and dozens and dozens of categories as the previous law did. Mr. Speaker, I think I've covered most, if not all, of the concerns that were raised last evening. So I just want to recognize my colleagues in this Honorable House for supporting this bill, and the government for their work over the last few months in getting to this point. I want to also thank the legislative drafting team for their ever-efficient work in scribing the amendment today and these amendments, and of course, going forward, the ministry staff, planning, the Cayman Contractors Association, and other stakeholders that participated in discussions surrounding these amendments. Mr. Speaker, many long hours were spent rehashing the semantics of the changes in an effort to try and get it as right as we possibly can. There is never any perfect piece of legislation or any perfect law, but we certainly think that we have a good start. And Mr. Speaker, the next steps is to appoint a new builders board, which we have already started to draft the cabinet paper. I have no doubt that they will take their responsibility seriously and continue the task of registering contractors to the respective categories, Mr. Speaker. And once passed, we will make some minor but significant revisions that will bring the regulations in line with the newly amended law, and I'm confident that this amendment will create a proficient and efficient industry that we can all be proud of. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I want to call on all contractors to prepare for the process of registering if you have not been registered before with the board, and I encourage everyone to participate. Once in effect, Mr. Speaker, they will not be able to activate a building permit or a call for an inspection if they have not registered under this law. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few explanations and clarifications, I look forward to members' support in passing these amendments to the Builders Law, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question is that a bill shortly entitled "A Bill for a Law to Amend the Builders Law 2018 Revision to change the composition of the Builders Board, to streamline the qualification requirements for appointment to the Builders Board, to change the categories of registration for contractors and for incidental and connected purposes, be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The Builders Amendment Bill 2019 has been given a second reading. I think at this point we will take the break for lunch. We'll come back at 1:45.